The purchase of Alaska, often referred to as Seward's Folly, is one of the most fascinating and misunderstood moments in U.S. history. In 1867, the United States bought Alaska from Russia for $7.2 million, about $153 million today, a deal that many Americans disliked at the time. So how did this all come about, and why was it so important? By the mid-19th century, Russia found Alaska to be more of a loss than an asset. It was far from the rest of the Russian Empire and expensive to maintain. Plus, they worried they might lose Alaska to Britain in a conflict, given its proximity to British-controlled Canada. So they decided to sell it, and U.S. Secretary of State William H. Seward jumped at the opportunity. In doing so, the relations were not poor, and Britain would no longer be able to use Alaska to possibly threaten Russia's security during the Crimean War. Seward saw Alaska as a strategic move. He believed that expanding U.S. territory was essential for economic growth, trade, and national defense. Even though $7.2 million, about 2 cents per acre, was cheap for land, many Americans thought the purchase was a waste of money. They referred to it as Seward's Folly, or Seward's Icebox, mocking the idea of acquiring a remote frozen land with little to no population and industrial use. However, over time, Seward was far ahead of his time. In the decades that followed, Alaska revealed itself to be a treasure trove of natural resources. Gold was discovered in the late 19th century, sparking the Klondike Gold Rush, which established full-time residents that eventually grew over time. Later, Alaska became vital for its oil, natural gas, timber, and fisheries, including its strategic importance in global conflicts, particularly during World War II and the Cold War. Today, Alaska is celebrated as one of the most beautiful and resource-rich states in the U.S. What was once considered a folly became one of the smartest investments in American history. The purchase of Alaska is a reminder that sometimes the boldest moves, though not immediately understood, can pay off in ways no one ever imagined into the long run. The annexation of Hawaii in 1898 was a crazy turning point in U.S. history, turning the shift from a continental power to an imperial power. The United States gained Hawaii, a beautiful group of islands in the Pacific Ocean, as the result of years of economic, political, and military ways coming together in a way that would change both Hawaiian and American history. The Hawaiian Islands were originally settled by Polynesians who voyaged across the Pacific from the Marquesas Islands around 400 AD, followed by settlers from Tahiti in the 9th to 10th century. These early Hawaiians developed a rich and distinct culture with deep connections to the land and sea, including each island having an independent government of its monarchy till they joined in 1810 to a unified government power. In the early 19th century, Christian missionaries from the United States arrived in Hawaii. Their mission was to spread Christianity and Western education to the islands. While they succeeded in converting many Hawaiians, their influence also brought significant cultural changes, including the introduction of Western customs, language, and governance. Unfortunately, introduced diseases such as measles, smallpox, tuberculosis, influenza, and syphilis, which would decrease Hawaiian native populations by almost 80%. Over time, American settlers and business interests, particularly in the sugar industry, gained substantial power in the Hawaiian kingdom. In 1893, a group of American settlers, with support from the U.S. government, drafted up a plan to overthrow Queen Liliuokalani, the last monarch of Hawaii. In fear of bloodshed and retaliation by American settlers, she would surrender with the hope the U.S. would return her power. With her surrender, they established a provisional government and sought annexation by the United States. Initially, annexation faced resistance both in Hawaii and in the U.S. Congress. Many Hawaiians opposed losing their sovereignty, and some Americans questioned the ethics of the takeover. However, during the Spanish-American War in 1898, Hawaii's location in the Pacific became crucial for military and trade purposes. President William McKinley, a strong supporter of annexation, signed the Newlands Resolution, officially making Hawaii a U.S. territory. The annexation had significant effects. For the United States, it secured its presence in the Pacific, allowing for ships to easily stop and prepare for its last leg of voyage to European countries. also allowing the U.S. to enter demanding economic markets, resulting in the U.S. to progress its ways for its emergence as a global power. For Hawaiians, it marked the loss of their independence and the beginning of significant cultural and political changes. The annexation of Hawaii remains a complex and debated chapter in history, reflecting themes of imperialism, cultural transformation, and the struggle for sovereignty. The Spanish-American War, which started in 1898, was a short but meaningful conflict that had lasting effects on worldwide history. Cuba was under Spanish control at the time, but Cuban rebels were fighting for their independence. The United States sided with Cuba's struggle and saw an opportunity to expand its influence. Tensions escalated dramatically when the USS Maine, an American battleship, mysteriously exploded in Havana Harbor. The media back in the United States immediately began to blame the Spanish for this devastation, more so to get more people to buy their newspapers, which was called yellow journalism. The United States used this opportunity to declare war on the Spanish and secure trade routes that would pass by Cuba, originating from New Orleans. The conflict unfolded primarily in two regions, the Caribbean and the Pacific. In the Caribbean, one of the most notable events was the charge up San Juan Hill, led by Teddy Roosevelt and his Rough Riders, which became a symbol of American strength. Meanwhile, in the Pacific, the U.S. Navy achieved a decisive victory against the Spanish fleet at the Battle of Manila Bay in the Philippines. These victories in naval battles remained consistent, and the U.S. naval forces showed its true strength, devastating the Spanish forces. By the end of 1898, Spain accepted defeat, and the Treaty of Paris was signed to formally end the war. As part of the agreement, the United States gained control of territories including Puerto Rico, Guam, and the Philippines. While Cuba was granted independence under the Platt Amendment, the U.S. could invade Cuba if it happened to not agree with their decisions. The Spanish-American War was more than just a short-lived conflict. It marked the idea of the United States as a global power, which would finally change America's status to be one of the strongest and rapidly growing countries, which is still true to today. The Panama Canal, one of the greatest engineering milestones in history, didn't come about without its fair share of drama. The story starts in the late 19th century when a French company, led by Ferdinand de Lesseps, the guy behind the Suez Canal, began construction in Panama, which was then part of Colombia. But things didn't go as planned. Disease, harsh conditions, and financial troubles brought the project to a standstill. Enter the United States. In the early 1900s, President Theodore Roosevelt saw the canal as a way to boost U.S. trade and military power by linking the Atlantic and Pacific Oceans. Roosevelt wasn't one to avoid a challenge, so when negotiations with Colombia to acquire the canal zone failed, the U.S. took a bold approach. In 1903, the U.S. supported a Panamanian independence movement. Not long after Panama declared independence, the new government signed a treaty with the U.S., granting control of a 10-mile-wide canal zone. With the new grant to work on the canal, the construction of the canal began once again. It was no small task, for workers had to contend with rough terrain, landslides, and tropical diseases like malaria and yellow fever. Tackling disease was a breakthrough. Under the leadership of Dr. William Gorgas, efforts to control mosquitoes, which rapidly spread the disease, in the area significantly reduced illness and saved countless lives. The canal used a system of locks, which are like giant water elevators, to lift and lower ships as they travel across the narrow land, known as an isthmus. These locks fill with water to raise ships to a higher level, and then drain water to lower them back down, helping ships cross the land more easily. But the story doesn't end there. For decades, the canal remained under U.S. control, leading to tensions with Panama. In 1977, the Torrijos-Carter treaties were signed, agreeing to transfer control of the canal to Panama by 1999, which was a promise that was fulfilled. The Panama Canal isn't just a big part of engineering. It's a symbol of determination, ingenuity, and yes, a bit of political hardship. But it forever reshaped global trade and solidified the USA. Each of these is a big milestone for the history of the U.S. and how it is today. This includes the purchase of Alaska, the annexation of Hawaii, the Spanish-American War, and the construction of the Panama Canal, which helped shape the United States' rise as a global power. The new ownership of Alaska, which expanded U.S. territory with vast natural resources, while the annexation of Hawaii strengthened America's strategic position in the Pacific. The Spanish-American War, which marked a turning point for how other countries viewed the U.S. as a power, as the U.S. gained territories and began asserting itself on the world stage. Finally, the Panama Canal showcased American new ideas and further secured its role in global trade and influence. Together, these events reflect a time of ambition, growth, and transformation that redefined the nation's place in the world.